Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to the session on governance. I'm Stuart Cochrane. This is Mark Stokes. It's going to be a mixture of practical and theoretical implementations and what we looked at when we implemented governance in Kellogg's. I plan to talk for around 40 minutes and then open up to the floor, just talk around some of your governance key questions and any issues that you're actually currently going through. So the agenda, quickly who we are, background to Kellogg's SharePoint implementation, a governance overview, so that's quite theoretical, and then into some of the practical elements of the Kellogg strategy around governance, Kellogg goals and objectives. We've got a governance template that we're going to talk through, and also some gotchas that we've experienced over the last couple of years. I've been involved in SharePoint about 2 years now, mainly on the collaboration sites for 2007, and we're just at the moment going through a 2010 global implementation. Okay, so here we are, Mark, over to you.
Stuart says, my name is Mark Stokes. I've been an IT professional for about 11 years, working with SharePoint for about 7 years. I've been working with it since the beta of 2003, so I've been in the game for a little while. I'm also the coordinator for the SharePoint user group for the Northwest, so I arrange all the meetings in Manchester. Does everyone here know about the user group, or people have not heard of it? Yeah, it's a few. So the SharePoint user group, what we try to do, I'll just do a couple of minutes on that, is it's a free user group we arrange. Quite a few of the people talking here either talk at the user groups or arrange the meetings, and I look at the Northwest ones. It's great, it's free, there's no vendor sale, we all do it off our own backs. So it's worth finding out in the region you're in. Go to the website, find out who arranged them. Literally bi-monthly we arrange different meetings and get the speakers in doing a different session. So I highly recommend people get involved in the user group. And if anyone wants to do a talk as well, you can do it. It's purely community fed. So I definitely recommend looking at the user group. I've worked for quite a few different companies in the past as a freelancer. Some quite big names there, so that's good. So that's me.
And I'm Stuart Cochrane. I've worked at Kellogg's for 9 years. Originally started as a .NET and SQL developer, moving then on to the European Intranet Manager. I've got the intranets across 8 countries in Europe. And more recently, over the last 2 years, the Centre of Excellence lead for collaboration in SharePoint. Okay, so a little bit of a background to the talk today. We're currently launching a single global intranet platform using SharePoint 2010. Current state at the moment for our intranets, we have 5 different regional sites, 1 in the US, 1 in Latin America, 1 in Europe, 1 in Australia, New Zealand, and 1 in Asia. 5 different technologies. One of the portals is in SAP, one's actually using SharePoint, another's using a content management system called Episerver, and there's another custom content management system as well. Regional collaboration, regional development, and regional governance. And what we're moving to with SharePoint 2010 is a single place personalised for you in your role, a single SharePoint platform, and also global collaboration, global development, and global governance to support and control the above. So it's quite a complex piece, quite a complex project. You need a strong governance plan in place to facilitate that collaboration, the development across different cultures and across different regional laws and statutory and regulatory processes and regulations. So Mark's just going to give a quick governance overview.
Okay, so one thing I want to start with is just get an understanding, who's got a governance policy in the moment for SharePoint? Yeah, a few people. So that's people haven't got a governance policy or don't want to put their hands up. So do you document your governance policies? You have a big, thick document that has all your different bits and bobs in? Or yeah, good. Okay, that's good. Okay, so governance, what is governance? Basically, we can break governance down into 4 main areas. Try and not get in the way of everyone. So we're really thinking about policies. So some examples of policies are, I'm going to read just a few ideas off to give some examples. We're talking about what can and can't be done on the environment. We're talking about how big content databases can be. We're talking about site quotas. We're talking about who can create content types. Should content types even be allowed? We're talking about web parts, what web parts are available, what web parts are not available. So there's a whole bunch of different policies that we need to set. They're just small kind of individual items that say something can or can't be done, really. We're talking about roles, so who's involved in SharePoint in the business. So we're thinking about end users, we're thinking about power users, site administrators, designers, developers, architects, business owners. You know, there's a whole plethora of people who are involved, so we need to think about them. Responsibilities, so for each of those groups of users, what are they responsible for on the platform? For it to work, all the users need to work together, and all the different roles need to work together to actually get the platform going, get it supported, and make sure it remains usable. And we think about processes, so how things actually happen on the environment. How do we provision a site? How do we request a site? How do we do backup and restore? So all these different processes that we need to go to. And it all ties together. So within them there'll be policies, within them there'll be roles and responsibilities. So it's a coming together of all these 4 different areas, really. So what needs to be governed? You could pretty much say the whole of SharePoint could be governed, the whole environment can be governed, but then we get a little bit too far. So think about what's important to your business, what you need to set governance around, and don't really go any further. So I'm going to talk about some other bits later on how we develop it, but basically just set governance on what you need to. Don't just take a document and say, right, we need to just copy this governance template and make it applicable to ours. Yeah, just keep it as slim as you can, and then therefore it'll be easier to manage and maintain and show to users. You know, don't set governance on what web parts are available if they're all available. It's just pointless, you just wasted space. We can really break it down to 2 areas, so we can think about back-end governance and front-end governance. So back-end, we think about, say, their servers, database, network connectivity, all the techie bits that end users probably aren't going to be interested in. And the front-end stuff, so the information architecture, how does that work? What content types do we have? Excuse me, what shared columns do we have, if any? What site taxonomies do we put in and recommend people use? This is all governance. It's all educating the business on how to actually use the environment and maintain it and manage it. So why do we need governance? Well, we need to govern it to make sure that we can support business requirements. If a business user comes in and says, right, I want this big system that's going to have 2 terabytes of information, you know, it's going to be updated every hour, well, then we need to make sure that the processes are in place to make sure the environment can handle it, make sure the roles and responsibilities are set for managing, reporting it, setting SLAs. So all these are the governance items around what we need to be looking at. We want to make sure content is quality, so we need policies around content approval, that kind of stuff, and we want to make sure that, you know, we keep published areas with just that quality signed off information. We want to make sure the user experience is great, so have governance around navigation schemas and how people actually use the site, how they get around the site, what they see on the page, so maybe have governance on. You know, if we want to just show people content related to their job role, then just, again, have all of that understood so it's there, outlined, documented, everyone knows how to actually put it onto the site. We want to provide sufficient SLAs, so by defining the processes, roles and responsibilities, then we can say, okay, if we do have a problem, how long does it take us to restore from backups, as an example? So we know what we can support in the environment and we can make those pledges to the business. So they know what they're getting as well. We also want to avoid solution, team site and content proliferation. By solution, I'm talking about sort of development solutions, so we don't want just lots of sandbox solutions everywhere. Or if we do, we need to make sure we can actually maintain and support it. We don't want team sites sprawling up everywhere. If we do, then we need to maintain them, you know, get rid of them once they're finished with. And content, so just, again, make sure there's approval and there's retention policies on documents if necessary. Again, don't define a policy if it's not important. So we're really looking around these kind of areas, and we can see it's all about making sure the environment's stable and content is quality. Who's responsible for governance? Well, everybody is really. So we're really thinking about people who are setting the governance, for what reasons they're setting the governance. Everyone's involved in following the governance models that's there. If I say governance one more time, I'm probably going to shoot myself. So it's a really good idea to try and build a governance group. So think about getting users involved, find out what they want to do on the environment, what their requirements are. This is not IT pushing rules down to the business. We need to find out what it is the business wants to do and what we need to support. Get your executive stakeholders in. What do they want to use SharePoint for from a business perspective at a higher level? Get your division leads in there, technical specialists. Literally across the spectrum of the business needs to have an input. It's not just telling people what they can do. It's getting feedback and making sure we provide them with a solution to support that. So use the governance group to actually make sure you're delivering what they want. You can get it's a good feedback forum from the users as well, to find out if what you're providing them is sufficient for purpose. And meet regularly, discuss what's working, what's not working. It could be an open forum, an open discussion. It could be a presentation. This is what we're doing. What do you think? There's a whole manner of ways of doing it. So everybody is responsible for doing it, either setting it, writing it, or adhering to it. But we need to think about it, putting it across the business. So again, so we're talking about all these different policies, roles, responsibilities, process, but how do we actually make that available? I'm going to talk a bit later after Stuart takes over on some ideas for a governance site templates, how to make it accessible to people. Because we probably find a lot of companies I've been in before have this 200 or 300 page document that is their governance policy. It's great. You spend 3 months writing it. You get it all checked over, approved and signed off, and you put it on a SharePoint site somewhere. And nobody reads it ever again, or until you upgrade, and then you need to just tweak a few bits. So really, there's not really any templates out there that says this is how you should be putting together your governance document, because from the examples I put out, it's so broad. There's so much in the environment you can set governance on that you're not going to give a template, tick a box for the bits you need. So you need to think about what's appropriate for your own organisation and then just document it in that manner. That's why I don't think there should ever be a governance template that you can apply to your business. There are, obviously, if you go onto TechNet, you've got the Fabricam governance model that Joel Olsen wrote. It's a great starting point, but don't just take a copy of that and then make it fit your business. It's not the way to do it. You need to just think about what they're covering, think about all the suggestions I've given you, and then see what's applicable to your business and write your own governance document. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. If it's simple, people will be able to read it. If it's really complicated, long, unwieldy, no one will ever read it and nobody will adhere to it, and you're going to get all of the issues that we get with no governance at all. I don't like governance documents for the reasons I've just said. No one's going to read them. So, yeah, I'll talk to you later about a site template and show you how you can start making it a bit more accessible. And governance is not a set of rules. It's not just what users can't do. It's also about what they can do. Okay, it's about what they can expect to be able to do on it as well. So don't think of it as a draconian set of rules on what people can't do on the environment. It should be more friendly, more positive than that.
Okay. So in terms of what we did at Kellogg's, we wanted to look out and learn from best practices that are already there. So we looked at Microsoft, we looked at other governance frameworks such as COBIT, to gather all the governance elements, and then we're going to make them applicable to Kellogg's. So in terms of the governance strategy, we aligned it to Microsoft best practices. I've got a quick diagram that most of you have probably seen already in terms of SharePoint 2010, and that aligns to the 3 pillars: IT governance, backups and restore, quotas, application management, so development, customizations, and then also information management, which is all about permissions and access control. So that talks about everything about SharePoint. but I needed to look at more overarching governance, so decision-making, approval and funding, request and support processes. And so that's when I turned my attention to COBIT, which is a governance framework mapped to the SharePoint lifecycle. Now, COBIT's globally accepted. It's re-looked at the way it has applied itself to SharePoint this year. So in January, it actually created a brand new framework and a process to fit SharePoint. And this fits in broadly to the SharePoint lifecycle, which is scope, plan for launch, plan for operations, go and launch, operate and enhance. And in a few more slides, I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. But the key thing, like Mark says, was you've got your templates there, you've got your industry best practice, you've got your theory, but you've got to make that work for your organisation. So we really thought about this long and hard, and what we decided the best way to do to actually validate what we were being told was through the use of personas. So we identified all the different personas within Kellogg's that will be using SharePoint, understood what information they created, what information they consumed, what tasks did they do on a daily basis, and then we started validating our governance around those tasks. An example coming up later as well is around the site creation process. So the Microsoft SharePoint best practice, the COBIT framework gives you the high level, and then when you get into the detail, that's when you use your personas. So my key challenge was, I find governance very complex, but we need to make it simple. But I wanted to use a very structured approach to defining governance. And the key challenge was to successfully map business goals to IT goals to a governance solution. You'll find a lot of governance solutions that have taken the Fabricam approach, the Microsoft 3 pillars, the COBIT. You've defined your governance, but does that really align to your business goals and objectives? So I wanted to consistently map IT goals, business goals to the solution as we went through. So for example, a key objective was to agree the balance between IT control and user empowerment. The business goal was to empower users to create team sites and collaboration sites. The IT governance goal was to ensure we avoid solution, team site and content proliferation. And then the governance solution was to check and balance the two. So we wanted to allow site owners to create some sites, but at the same time, we wanted to build processes around the site creation, helping users make the informed decisions as to when to create a subsite, when not to create a subsite. If they do create a subsite, should it be them that creates it? Have they got the experience to create? Or should they be engaged in IT? And we've got some more processes and decision trees to show you how we actually implemented it on the next few slides. So for me, this was the key thing that made governance work for us, to consistently go back and map the solution to the business goals and the IT goals. So a lot of you have seen this before. I just thought I'd put this up for reference. This was a starting point. It was a great starting point for us. A lot of governance has already been defined. Take it, use it, and then make it applicable to your organisation. So the 3 pillars: IT governance, information management, and application management. We talk about backup and restore, a lot of the infrastructure governance in IT here, information management, information architecture, metadata strategies, content type strategies, information access, and then on to application management, customization, branding, sandbox solutions. You're never going to get all of the governance defined for day one of launch. So what you really need to do is prioritize. Think about what do you need from day one, what are your priorities, and focus on those. And like Mark said, keep it as simple as possible, and then you can build on it. It's always going to be work in progress. And this is the COBIT framework as well. Again, this really helped me because it gave me more of an overarching sense of governance, taking SharePoint out of the equation and looking more at IT governance. So we've got the phases: scope, plan for launch, prepare for operations, launch, operate and enhance. And in the scoping phase, we looked at our strategy, our goals and objectives, We did a gap analysis. What governance is already out in the organisation? There was a huge amount already in Kellogg's, and we didn't need to rewrite it. So we took the policies and then just created some SharePoint best practice, some SharePoint principles around those policies. That saved us a huge amount of time. We looked at lessons learned from other projects, industry best practice, and then looked at our deliverables and our approvals matrix for all the work we did. And in terms of planning for launch, the social media policies, one of the key ones was the decision-making process. So we're going through that in more detail on the next few slides. Define the information architecture, migration, information management, and risk management. And as we go through, all the governance is aligned to those processes. So we take that, though, and it doesn't really mean much to the user. So what we really need to do is make it work for Kellogg's. So this is an example of the site creation process. This is one element of governance that we really spent a lot of time thinking about. To allow site owners to create their own sites, or for them to engage IT to create those sites, and to also challenge whether a site is needed. So first of all, I started Googling. I wanted to control this. I wanted to automate it through a technical solution. We decided not to go down that route. And what we decided was to, if we think of the business goals before, to allow the user to create their own sites, empower the user, but also to give them the best practice to think about what they're really doing and challenge them. So we started creating these decision trees. There's actually a decision tree that comes before this one, and that challenges the user. Do you actually need a sub-site? Or will a wiki suffice? Will a document library work? Will a blog work rather than actually creating the sub-site? We saw lots of sub-sites created, and when we actually went and spoke to the users, they didn't actually need the sub-site. They could have used the site they had and actually just created the blog, the wiki, the document library. Then the next challenge was to really think about the user's going to go and create lots of sites. Are they going to be supported? What happens if the user goes and builds them, it was only for 10 people, and then you suddenly got 200 people working on them? So these were challenges we saw. Started with 10 documents, you were then up to 10,000 documents. Again, this was happening in the business. So we came up with some decision trees, and we said to the site owners, go through these decision trees and actually work out whether you can create them yourself or you need to engage IT. If you engage them yourself and it's not compliant to this, they're not necessarily supported within an SLA. If we develop them for you, we can ensure they're architected correctly and we can support. And it's really been clear to the user that if they carry on and actually develop the sites and don't adhere to the business processes we're putting in place, it's going to be a challenge for us to support them. So looking at the decision tree, we're asking, is the architecture complex? Are your security permissions required? Are they complex? Is it document intensive? And will you have a high number of users? So these are sort of quite simple questions. If you answer yes to any of those, you really need to be engaging IT in the SharePoint group to help you architect that site. If you answer no to those, we're saying go and create the site yourself. If you need support, we should be able to support because it's quite simple. But also inform your super user group as well. One of the key things that I've seen when users go and create the sites, because they can go and do more, they have this immense pressure on their shoulders as to what do I do next? And we're only a small IT team. So we need to help them develop their roadmap before creating the site and then start working with super user groups to help them build and share that knowledge. And that was one of the key areas of governance for a site owner. If you're on a big complex site, you have to be a member of a super user group. And that's been really successful. So just a little bit about the governance template. Mark's going to speak about it in a bit more detail. But these were some of the items we captured in the template. So for each governance item, we asked the governance team to start filling out this information. So we had the governance item. An example is publishing to the corporate homepage. We had the owner, which was the Corporate Communications Director. We had the persona, who actually does this and uses it, which is the Corporate Communications Editor. And then we built the policy and the governance around FAQs. So we asked lots of questions. Who can publish information to the corporate homepage? Answer, corporate communications approved editors. And that's when we started being able to build the governance. One of the key things, though, is you say this is what we're going to do, but how are we really going to enforce it? How are we going to evaluate it? So within each of the governance policies or items, we actually challenged ourselves and said, to measure and evaluate this item of governance is working, we're going to test user accounts and workflow approvals on a quarterly basis. How are we actually going to enforce that only corporate communications and approved editors can publish? Well, we're going to use workflows. And it does seem quite simple, but we need to keep going back and then challenging ourselves that we're actually doing this. Localization as well. So one governance element might be different for one business function, one country, one region. And so we have to look at that. In human resources in Asia, they can actually publish information as well. It's not just corporate communications. And then we look at standards. What standards are already out there that when you're developing your governance, you should be adhering to or following as best practice. So we actually have some writing for the web standards. So as people publish to the corporate homepage, we're looking at standards that we've already developed that are out there that people can use. And then also, as I said before, existing policies. There were so many existing policies out there for us. We already had one on social media. That was more external social media, but it gave us the right principles, and then we could just adapt that and use SharePoint best practice for internal social media. Okay, so some of the goals and objectives. I mentioned before, governance for me was a huge, complex area, and I wanted quite a structured approach to actually develop the governance. So COBIT uses this cascading realization approach, and we identify key goals and objectives which would help us deliver the governance strategy. So what we did was we defined the goal, we defined what we will focus on in order to achieve the goal, we defined how we'll achieve the goal, and we defined how we'll measure and evaluate the goal's success. So we develop the governance, but this helps us challenge what we're developing and why we're developing it. Key goals and objectives. So you'll have seen a lot of these before. Mark mentioned some of them earlier. Ensure we have a clear decision-making process. Ensure risks are identified early and a clear escalation process is in place. Ensure we clearly communicate roles and responsibilities. And then the usuals: avoid solution, team site and content proliferation, controls around content security and permissions, and ensure employees know how to behave responsibly. So an example there of actually putting that process in place in terms of ensure we have a clear decision-making process is the example here. So the goal of ensure we have a clear decision-making process will be achieved by focusing on what are the key decisions, who should be making them, how do we ensure the right people are making the decisions, what is the process for making decisions, how long do decisions take to make, and how are decisions communicated. And we really need to be quite clear, because we're moving from regional to global working. Multiple teams, multiple cultures, different time zones. So this is why we really wanted to put a real structured approach in place. We're going to achieve that by creating a decision-making RACI, and the success of that will be measured by how quickly we make decisions, and does our decision-making become faster over time? Are we learning from it? And then how many decisions are still open or unresolved? And so on a periodic basis, we should be going back to this and just challenging this is how governance is working. And that's just an example of the RACI we created for decision making. It's actually a lot more than this, but questions such as how do I request out-of-the-box changes to templates, requests for custom development, changes to information architecture, add, edit, delete content, and then the different teams and personas and people across the top. And then we look at the RACI. I think it's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And then we sort of added a little bit extra onto the RACI in terms of we needed to give users an idea of how long decisions will take, what is the process to actually request decisions or ask decisions, and frequency and complexity. And that gives us as a team an idea of how long these decisions should take, and who to actually engage to do that. So for complex decisions, it goes to the strategy team, possibly the governance board, or simple routine, that's just through our IT service manager. Okay. So Mark's going to talk about the governance template.
Okay, so as you can see, the amount of governance you end up coming up with is quite a lot. So what we want to do is really think about how to make this accessible to the business. Like I said, a governance document is not a good medium for doing this. Nobody will ever read it. I can't stress that enough. So to those points, it's a good. You could use it as a starting point just to get stuff down and understand what you're doing and throw it around a bit, but that shouldn't be your final presentation. So I just want to give you some thoughts on how to kind of make it accessible. At the end of the day, governance content is just like any other organisational content. There's no difference between governance content, any other type of list, any other type of documentation you've got. It's just content. I like your answer that you've got a governance site. Hopefully this is the way you're structuring things as well. So it's exactly what I'm suggesting now. So when you think about putability, how do we record our, I've stolen Bill English's favourite word, so how do we record the governance information, and then how do people go and find it? The amount of governance that you probably will generate over the time is going to end up being a lot. When you start thinking about when you get into the finer details on the processes that Stuart was highlighting, you do end up over time with a lot of governance. But hopefully it's all valid and relevant, so that's okay. Because it's SharePoint content, it doesn't matter how much there is, as long as people can find it. So governance generally isn't applicable to more than one role. Some probably is, some will cover quite a few. But again, because we've got some of our categories already, so we've got some metadata already from what we've seen so far. We've got role, we've got policy, we've got responsibilities, and we've got processes. So we can start tagging our governance information. So, you know, if we're talking about backup and restore policies, tag it to the IT groups. End users don't care about that. Site owners don't care about it. However, maybe there's parts of it that do. So maybe if they're interested on if they lose information, how long does it take to recover from a backup if they want to restore the information. So there are parts of that policy that do relate to those users. So we can even break it down. So break down your policies within a guide into small chunks and then tag it, just those bits, to the relevant people. So if I, as an end user, go to a governance dashboard, governance site, or an area, then I will just see the content that's relevant to me. And IT will see content that's relevant to them, and so on and so forth. So in that way, it's just content, like any other content. So think about your site, think about making it accessible. And another idea, show them governance when they need to know it. So a governance site is a good idea, but why not start embedding that in other areas of your site? So if you have a site creation page, why not show site creation governance there? You know the person who's creating the site is probably a site admin. You know there's a policy or some policies around creating sites. Because it's tagged, because it's SharePoint content, just show that information at the point users are performing those actions. If it was in a Word document, you couldn't do that. So by chunking it down, it lets you actually present it to people in a more manageable way, make it accessible to them. Chances are the businesses already do something like this. HR probably writes policies and handbooks. IT will write policies and handbooks. There's expertise in getting these bits and bobs together, chunking it down, and making it presentable. So use their expertise on how they write their policies and just do the same thing, but present it in a SharePoint way. Use the tools you've got. Did you know lists? So a nice idea if, just say, did you know you can create a site of this template to do this? Again, show them the information they need at the point they need it. So by using SharePoint tools, we can tag it, we can show it in all the different ways, and any other way you can think of. So it's extensible and nice and easy for users to get into it. another idea, rather than just having one governance site where you record everything, chances are different parts of the business will want to write their own governance for their own area. So IT might want an IT governance site where they do all that techie back-end stuff that they want to do. There might be some publishing governance that comms want to maintain. So let them write their own governance. So if you start thinking about content types, metadata, again, all the SharePoint tools we've got have many different governance sites throughout the organisation. And then all we need to think about is a governance dashboard where we bring it all together. We can aggregate all this content in exactly the same way we aggregate all our other business content. So think about, again, who's responsible. Comms is responsible for it. Let them do it themselves. So we really just think about trying to make it accessible to people, get rid of the documents, and I think we'll have a much better experience with it. So I'll leave for time. Still got some. So that's my thoughts around governance templates. I was going to put in some examples and screenshots of where we did it, how we did it in Collogs, but I decided not to do that again because it's so unique to each business and how they do it. It depends on how your teams are formed. It depends how your sites are architected on who's going to do it. I thought I didn't really want to kind of push or demo one way, so I thought hopefully just given the high level ideas would be enough to inspire you to kind of put your sites together in that way. Yeah, that's my thoughts on that. So
there's some
ahead of time, but we can open up the discussion.
What's that? What time is it now?
25 to, so.
Okay, cool. So some of the things we've seen, and again, we wouldn't have necessarily been able to put governance around them for day one, because there's so much governance out there, and it changes from every organisation. It could depend on your bandwidth, maybe, depend on your farm infrastructure, depend on your users and the complexity and the amount of training they have. So just some of the things that we saw, and these are just a few of the many, but content query web parts, deep folder, hierarchies and structures, lists with over 2,000 items do impact performance. You know, I spoke to many techies and they said, you know, if you go over 2,000, if you start having very deep site structures, if your content query web part goes over thousands of sites, it will impact the performance. But I thought we had a pretty big farm. We soon learned one content query web part actually took about 1.5 gig of memory and just slowed everything down. It was unbelievable. So really make sure you understand some of the SharePoint best practices, definitely the technical ones, because we then had to go in and re-architect some of these sites, and it took a long time to do. You won't get them all straight away, but try and identify as many as possible. Site proliferation. It's going to be the key one we all talk about. Key for us is we wanted to make sure long-term we could empower the users, so we didn't want to put a technical solution in place. We really wanted to manage it through business process. We've now got that in place. We didn't do it as well as we could have from day one. So we really challenged the users. Do you need the site, as we spoke about before? And if you do need the site and it's complex, engage IT. If you don't engage IT and then you go and create it and you have a problem down the line, we're not necessarily going to be able to support it within SLAs, and there may be a tax to then pay for support. But we need to continually monitor as well, and that's part of the governance plan, to make sure as a SharePoint team we use tools such as Quest or AvePoint to monitor site growth, usage, police the environment. Super user groups. So this was an area of governance that has really worked for us, because we've gone and developed lots of sites, we've built the sites, and the user from day one says, well, what do we do next? Because they can. And they feel the pressure on the business to then go and do something different. And really they need to step back, embed what they've done, use what they've got, and they're still all learning to use SharePoint. So one of the key decisions we made was that we'd roll out the site, and then the site owner would suddenly become quite isolated. And we were only a small team, and they didn't necessarily either come to ask us the questions, or it just sort of, there was a murmur within the business of discontent. So if you're a site owner of a large site, you have to be part of a super user group. And that super user group meets on a monthly basis. From an IT perspective, our inputs would be web stats, usage, site growth, metadata that's been created. And then from the super user group's responsibilities, that's reviewing those stats, making sure that the original goals and objectives we defined are still applicable and whether they change. And be the feedback mechanism for users to feedback up to the super user group, to IT. As I say, we're quite a small team, but we can support the super user groups, who then support the users.
I was wondering if you could elaborate on roughly how many super users you have.
Not many at the moment, but we're building on it.
Okay.
So for finance, we have about 10. And that's the plan for the other organisations. Oh, sorry, the other functions. So on the sites, we've actually put it into practice. It's worked well, but we're just starting on the implementation. And that works. So, and then approval and support. The key thing about any elements of governance, and this is why Mark says keep it simple, is really communicate the key elements of governance. So when we have training for all our site owners and end users, and at the end of each training session, as we go through the training, we have little key governance elements. So if you publish documents, the size of your document could be 50 megabytes. So I have little governance notes going through the training, and then governance highlights at the end of each training session. We have 4 training sessions: end user, site owner 1, 2, and 3. I was in a presentation earlier this morning, and the comment was, the training doesn't work for development and the technical piece, but actually for the super user groups, that really works for us. So give the business the responsibility of the business questions and then filter back. But the approval and support piece, people go out and create the sites and then expect us to support, and they would grow, and they'll have more users going on and more senior users going on, more complexity in terms of the documents. The site would go down and they'd be looking for support. So we need to be very clear on the key elements of governance and make sure site owners understand them. So if they don't adhere to the site creation process, then they won't get an SLA for support.
How does that work in practice when you've got a director screaming at you that the site has to be up and running? How does that work? You say, sorry, the site was created without...
Yeah. So then what we're looking at is a tax. So we have an offshore pool of resource where they can then pay for that support. But it's an education as well. Yeah.
Do all site owners get access to the same features from day one? Is it once I'm a site owner, I've got all the suites in there?
Yeah. What we if we look at the SharePoint pyramid, the famous pyramid, so you got your portal and then your collaboration sites. So in terms of the portal sites, sub-site creation is turned off. In terms of the collaboration sites, site creation is turned on. So then we've got a much more stronger level of control within the portal. I'd estimate only 20% of work will be in the publishing, who we are, what we do, etc. And then the real bulk of it will be in the collaboration sites. But no, it's open for each.
Actually, on that, if I'm creating content just for my team, I'm not going to push it up to the corporate site. It's not going to be seen internationally.
Yeah.
Do I have to go through the same burden in terms of adhering to governance as I would be if I was putting something out that...
That's a prime example of just setting governance on where you need to. So in that kind of situation, if it's just for that small group of people, and if there's only, and you know what you're doing, and if you understand the governance that you're supporting yourself, then sure, why not? You know, if that's what those people want to do. again, only define governance on what you need to. So if you're publishing content around the business, then you probably need that strength. But if you're just doing it for a small group of people, you're probably okay, as long as you understand the implications of doing that.
But if you've got a scenario where I've done that, people go, oh, I like this. When we now publish this up to the rest of the business, you've effectively you've either got to retrospectively say these things you can't do, or you go through those hurdles.
Things like that you're always going to deal with on a case-by-case basis, aren't you? So you're going to have a small subset of content like that or sites like that you're then going to want to promote. So then you can go back into the process, pick up the support, and then start promoting them up. But you've got the business need to do that. So if you're in trouble, then that's where you need to worry about SLAs. If it's a project you just decide is growing more than you initially thought, then you can engage the teams to actually come and give you the support.
But I think it's education as well. So, like you say, you don't want users to be doing something that then if they do publish it up to the portal, they've got to change the way they've been doing it. So it's definitely education for
you need to decide in
users.
your business what can you support, what can't you support, and what works best for your users. So, as with SharePoint, the answer is it depends on what you can support.
And what we do in terms of when we look at the portal and the collaboration sites, in the portal a lot of our governance is policy and mandated. In the collaboration sites a lot of it's around best practice and principles to follow.
Push those best practices out just into do you like to have it as in a site creation wizard, or you should be doing this before you get to that stage, or as you push it out?
Yeah, we're following the trainer approach. A lot of it is business process. It's not technically automated. It was a choice.
That's a good point. Don't underestimate the power of business process, of educating users. You don't have to have a technical solution for every scenario.
Yeah.
If you educate the business, you don't always need to put strict constraints in. As long as you can manage it and enforce it and let people know. So,
Yeah.
But the key,
Just good to give you
yeah.
the
But
key
there's times you do want the technical solution. So,
the key trap we don't want to fall in is we're adopting the trainer model, but we've got to keep engaging those trainers on a unbelievably regular basis. And within our training modules, in the end user training, we highlight the key governance elements, and those key governance elements are highlighted if they're applicable, in all the training modules, because people will soon forget. But that's also part of the super user group, so we're going to use that as a mechanism to keep educating users.
Super users, what sort of abilities you allow you give them? So what sort of restrictions you apply on their permissions? For example, can they create useful document libraries, and can they grant further permissions?
Yes, there's a slight difference in terms of, for a lot of our super user groups, it's actually people from the business, and they're not actually responsible for creating the sites, but they're making sure that what we're doing aligns to the business strategy. In terms of the site owner, they can pretty much do everything they need to out of the box. But the key thing for the super user group is to make sure that what we're doing is each individual function is either aligning regionally or globally, or what's our strategy and what's going on in other applications in the business. So that's really the key thing for the super user groups. Much more business focused, but then we have the site owners, and we have separate groups for them, so more technical training.
as Stuart mentioned before as well, there's the different training levels. There's actually different grades of super user in Kellogg. So there's an end user, people who just go in, consume content essentially, and that's all they're interested in doing to start with. And then the three different levels of super user will progressively build up their skill set. So initially it may be creating views, it may be adding columns, it might be creating document libraries maybe. The second level will be a step above that, and then a third level might be site collection, admin permissions. And then they kind of manage who has permission to do what, so it's up to the business really to make sure that people who have those permissions are trained to do what it is they need to do.
Do they need to go through an approval process? Because what we've done, we ended up with 12 like super user groups. So initially those 12 sites look the same, but after a year they all look completely different. So as a user experience, when you scroll through those sites, you don't know where you are.
Sure.
This is very distributed.
Yeah, well, you think about things in two ways then. One, technical restrictions, so limiting people's ability to make changes to master pages and, maybe eliminate the access to SharePoint Designer if you want to keep it all consistent look and feel. Or user train them. This is the way it is for consistency, prove to them. I know it's difficult, but, enforce it. If you own it, so, well, if you're going to make those changes, we're going to change it back. Or you just need to find a way that works for users, whether that's if you have the resources to put technical restrictions in, fine, do it. If you don't have the resources to do that, you need to get through to them at the end of the day. SharePoint is an open framework. It's difficult to set that real fine-grained restrictions. So you just need to find a way to get through to them. And if it's a case of just slapping them on the wrist, then do it.
And that was
it's tough. It is tough, but
Just a question on that, aligned with that. Do you use SharePoint groups, or are you using some sort of AD groups, or do you use a mixture of both?
we use a mixture of both.
You do?
Yeah, we use AD groups at what we call a cost centre level for a lot of the high-level departments. But then we break out into SharePoint groups if we need complex security structures or the site's only up for, let's say, a short period of time. So we sort of have a hybrid model.
How many SharePoint groups do you have then? Hundreds or?
For one site, we had about over 100. Because we have very complex regulations, finance regulations within Europe. So we have about 100.
That was really complex because there's regulations in place, legal ones, that each different region, each different country was essentially a separate organisation, so had to restrict financial information away. So for that one in particular, there was a lot of SharePoint groups to manage that and to prove that you could maintain that security.
Reading that I've done on that suggests you really ought to choose one or the other. Whether that's doable.
In practice, I would tend to try and prefer one over the other, but in reality, I think you need a mixture. So if you need to set some permissions over 50 site collections, you don't want to maintain a copy of all those SharePoint groups over all of the different ones. So in that case, you really kind of need an AD group to...
So sometimes the challenge will be for AD groups, you can't see who's in the end user can't see who's in the AD group.
Yeah.
But we're going to use AdPoint, which gives us that functionality. So if I couldn't do that, I'd be telling the users to probably use SharePoint groups because then they're in control of the data.
And just one more, there's folders. Seems to be the bane of SharePoint's life, is from what I can see about SharePoint.
Can I give you one little comment? We don't care where you store content, as long as it's tagged. Use folders. Folders are great. Folders let a librarian manage a small subset of content. And to be honest, we all hear about this 2,000 item limit per container. And sometimes it's nice if someone tags something, you want to find it. It's great to be able to navigate it. But so I actually don't have a problem with folders, as long as the information is tagged in a way that you can get it back out. Then there's no problem with it. The problem is users find it very difficult to change. Even if they think tagging it is going to spend a bit more time than putting it in there than using folders, it's what they're used to. Most users will happily do a little bit more work because they're comfortable with it. Yeah. So, but as soon as they start to realise the value of tagging content, and if you have a good information architecture you bring out, and they start to see the value, they'll start to buy into it. I've been in environments where folders have been completely disabled, environments where folders are allowed. All a folder is another bit of metadata. So if you don't need to aggregate that information with anything else, we'll let them carry on using folders if that works for their particular usage. So again, there's no hard and fast rule. I wouldn't ever say don't use folders or do use folders. It's a mixture. But
I just see some sites and before you know what you think, bloody hell, it's 10 gig.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're just going to copy a file share into a document library, you're going to have the same issues you had before. The structure is valid to the person who created the structure.
To emulate the file system.
Yeah. So it depends what you need to do with the information. If it's just for one person, we'll let them use their own folder structure. If it's for a team, it will only be valid to the person who set that folder structure up. So
yeah, it's in education. We have some good presentations that we use, and we go through scenarios. So we ask a user to go and find a particular document, and that could be in a folder structure starting with 2009. Then it might be our adult range. It might then be bran flakes. but someone else might have started that structure with adult brown flakes and then the years. And so they soon start to find that complexity. And then you show them how they do it in SharePoint. But it is an ongoing process because it's still easy to email documents as well. So 3 clicks, but actually to go and put them into SharePoint is 10 clicks. So they've really got to buy into the actual, why are we doing this?
If you can get people thinking about content types rather than document libraries and lists and folders, then if they're talking about content types, all of a sudden it just becomes less important where the content is, because as long as it's tagged, you can find it. So that kind of extends out to lists and libraries as well, really. So you've had a hand up for a while.
Just a quick thing about marketing. So you mentioned as early adopters, but marketeers obviously have a lot of issues around publishing to Facebook, Twitter. They also have big ecosystems with all their agencies. And is this coming marketing's way? Are they pushing back? Is it going to happen anyway? What's happening?
It's going to be a difficult question to answer that one, because the way we've looked at the implementation is we could have done it quite rapidly and just migrated the information into SharePoint and got people working in SharePoint quite quickly. But what we've actually decided to do is a very structured approach. So finance were going through a big structural change. So we went with them. HR, again, across the whole organisation. I went for sales and IT because they were ready at the time. And for us, we've taken a lot of time for each function to work with them, identify the data, all the meta tagging, all the content types, and then migrating. We've seen from previous experiences of other companies, it's just a migration rather than what we call a transformation. So the reason I can't answer that question is because we haven't looked at marketing yet. Just through that was the we looked at the organisations within Kellogg's and we decided these were the ones that would move first.
But in theory, purely in theory, this could govern, you could have an approval process whereby, say, the marketing director approves every corporate post, every Facebook post.
Absolutely.
I would think he'd be like, give me that right now. I really want.
I mean, what is that? That's just general content. It's just general information management, really, isn't it? So, yeah, absolutely. So this is why, going back to the template I said, marketing have their own governance requirements, that kind of thing. So tie that in.
Someone like Unilever,
True.
Or IBM have 47,000 participants.
Yeah.
Whoa. But I need some kind of approval.
Yeah.
I want to keep it loose enough, but tight enough. So to me, this is a problem. The marketeers are really in a lot of pain right now. So.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's the way they're looking at it. They want it to be loose enough in some areas and tight in other areas. So it's really
True.
because they want to keep the ecosystem, because you need the ecosystem for the creativity and that kind of thing. The question is how blended can you be? How much are you going to blend into third-party kind of people that messing around in your own corporate?
That's impossible. It depends on the organisation. That's impossible to answer. That level of blending on how structured or unstructured you are, that's a piece of governance as well. This is appropriate here, this is not appropriate here. So, that's can't answer that one. you just need a good SharePoint person to design the site, design the workflows that works for them, separate out. So if you're in that situation, maybe separate and have unstructured and structured areas of just marketing as well, and set different policies for different areas.
How big is the Kellogg environment? How many users will be able to access it?
The actual brand name are actually quite a small organisation in terms of people. We've got 17,000 knowledge workers. In Europe, about 4,000. And we'll be implementing UAG, Universal Access, so people will be able to log in from their home PCs.
Site collection or sub-site, yeah, okay. They're always an interesting one. So you need to just decide what's best for your business. So a lot of it is around scalability. So obviously, you know, if you have one big site collection for the whole business, all of a sudden you're going to have a lot of content and you need to do a lot of work in your databases to make sure you can fit it. So there's a technical issue there. Sometimes there's a breakdown in permissions. So we only want certain people to be permissioned to one area and not another area. Use that for site collection.
You can set that up in sub-sites.
You can do. Yeah, you can do. It just gives you an extra barrier. Sometimes you want a feature set for one area and not for another. Sometimes if a group of users just have an interest in a particular area, why mix it with everything else? Just leave it there. If we tag our content, we can still aggregate across site collections. You can set quotas to site collections. Yeah. So a perfect example coming back to marketing. So a great example there coming back to marketing. Marketing is going to have 150 megabyte PowerPoint presentations. So their quotas are going to need to allow 150 megabyte uploads, unless we can teach them how to shrink images. But then, you know, for other departments, maybe their quotas only upload 10 megabytes because that's all they need. So that's a great example.
Do you have any rules that you follow today to determine whether you create a site collection or a site?
We spent a long time trying to come up with a workflow to decide whether to do sub-sites or team site collections. We never really managed to get a definitive workflow. It kind of becomes a bit of a gut feeling through experience on what's the right approach based on quotas, based on permissions. So, sorry?
You guys decide that, it's not the customer.
Depends where you're looking. I mean, it depends how you structure it. It really does. For collaboration zone, self-service site creation, I would say create a new site as a site collection. It's easy. They'll do their own little bit with it. Just grows up. If you're talking about structured managed sites, then it goes through IT for them to do that kind of managed site for them. So you can make the decision of where it fits, whether it fits into a global structure or whether they sit separately and re-aggregate some other ways. So you get your SharePoint expert who understands the cons to make that decision on the managed sites. But the unmanaged sites probably don't really have that issue. So it's a sliding scale that probably will never really sit in the same place.